Our next speaker is new to the New York conference, but she did speak at our Gov. Her first programming language was Logo. Some of you know Logo. For those of you that don't, is we have a little turtle, and you tell it what direction to turn and how many steps to go. Yeah, and there is a board game version of this. You play little cards on a board game. It's really cool. So, everyone welcome Abigail.
So, your manager asks you, hey, can you build a chatbot with our documents? Or maybe they want to do something else. Maybe they want to build a tool that automates writing essays, or a tool that automates grading essays. Or maybe they want to automate writing proposals, or maybe they want to automate grading the proposals that somebody else's generative tool wrote. But probably it's, hey, can you build a chatbot with our documents? So this is not the presentation on how to build it. You saw that already from Alan. This is not the presentation on how to say no to your manager, although we might touch on that a little bit. This is the presentation on how do you tell if it's working, how do you automate telling if it's working a little bit, and how do you use large language models in evaluating your generative text tools. OK, or in other words, we got there. Automated evaluations for your RAG chatbot or other generative tool. And why am I up here? My name is Abigail, and I built a really bad chatbot, right? Like a lot of data scientists last year, there was all this code going around. I spent a weekend. I took somebody's Colab notebook that was like a demo for building RAG chatbots. I had a data collection strategy that was kind of neat. So I was trying to build something that would give me instructions on how to write tools using Shiny for Python, or Python Shiny. I always forget what the order of that is, but it was a new enough library that it wasn't yet in the training corpus for any of the LLMs that were out there. So I wrote something that grabbed the text from the GitHub repo, and then I put it into basically that Colab notebook. Okay, I refactored it a little bit. My code was kind of nice, but the important thing was it didn't work. Right? Like your code can be as nice as it wants, but if you actually set out and try to use the tool and it doesn't work, it's not really a success. And not only was it not a success, as in I was trying to code with it and it was giving me wrong answers, I couldn't even tell you how bad it was. Like I couldn't quantify how bad it was because I didn't have an evaluation strategy, okay, which I really wanted. Like even if it had just said, oh, it's like 95% bad, or I wanted something. Okay. So since then, I've been doing a lot to work on this whole LLM evaluation bit, and I've kind of been doing that full time since about October. And most of it's not totally related to this, but there's a lot of overlap with the kinds of ways we can think about how to evaluate like your specific RAG tools. Okay, but let's get back to, hey, can you build a chatbot with our documents? Okay. So somebody says this to you, you're going to build some pipelines, you're going to push some data through them, right?
Up there, right?
But wait. Maybe don't start with that. Maybe start with, who are your users for this going to be? Who's going to use this? What are they going to want to ask? How are they going to ask it? How good does this need to be before you can actually release it to humans? How quickly does it need to respond? And how should it fail? So like, for instance, if it's sort of unsure about something, where do you want to draw that line on refusing to answer versus answering, but like maybe not correctly? Okay? And there's another set of requirements that aren't exactly user requirements, but there's still things you should talk over with your manager. There are things like, how much money do we want to spend on this? How much engineer time do we want to spend on this? Because, and kind of this is a point I'll make throughout, this is not like your fun data scientist, science experiment, spend a week on it. There are a lot of things you can do with these tools to make them function better, but they involve money, things like making multiple large language model calls for each time somebody asks a question, or they involve engineering time. And so that's definitely like when you're kind of discussing this with your manager, and like, what do we want to get out of this? It's the user requirements, but it's also, how much do we really want to invest in this? Okay. So I should have used the slide that Jared used earlier with the New York City chatbot that was telling people to break the law when it came to things like landlord or taxes. I should have used that. But there have been a lot of bad RAG chatbots in the news. And the most recent one was the sort of priest kind of one. It was Father Justin, and he was supposed to give sort of general advice on Catholicism. And he said some really bad, I shouldn't anthropomorphize, it said some really bad things, okay, that the people who created it didn't want for it to say. And so a couple of examples, it said, yes, you can baptize your baby with Gatorade in an emergency. And it also was actually it was like hearing confession, right? It was like giving sacraments. So not so good. But the point I want to emphasize here, because this really stuck out for me in the coverage, was it cost the creators $10,000, and they did 6 months of beta testing, okay? So tell your manager that. Okay, again, like sort of set expectations on this. And my guess would be that their beta testing probably wasn't super adversarial. Okay, so when you talk about requirements, when you talk about testing, don't just ask it, don't just include in your requirements the things you're hoping somebody will ask. Include a broader scope of things that you're hoping somebody might not ask, but I mean, they might. So put that in too. Okay, so you got some requirements. And your requirements are gonna be things like, if somebody asks X and answers Y, maybe you answer, even if it's phrased poorly. You say, I don't know, for certain types of things. You have some strategy for if users try to mess with you, because they probably will. And then the sort of latency scale cost. I'm not really talking about that, but that's important too. Or alternatively, okay, if it's something that's not a RAG tool, if it's some other kind of thing, a lot of these things still apply. So like, if the proposal talks about X, then the evaluation of the proposal should say Y. And that's still going to be about text evaluation. Okay, so when you have an actual requirements gathering process, when you talk to your users or you use materials you already had to figure out what you wanted this table to do, this will really help you, like with any kind of software, this will help you figure out what to test when you're creating your product. And also when you might say no to your manager when they ask you this, because you built the thing and you had the requirements and it didn't do the requirements. Okay, so you have some requirements, you build something.
Steve's on.
Now what? Okay, so the most ad hoc testing is, I ask X, what does it say,
yeah.
right? And this is, you're going to do this kind of thing anyway, even if you don't have a testing strategy, because you're just going to want to make sure that your tool is actually working. Like, I hit it with a question, it says something, right? And so this here is, if it's 12 p.m. on March 26th in Boston, what time is it in Copenhagen? And I have some evals set up around this. They're for base models and not for RAG, because some of these LLMs are really not good at time zones, as it happens. It's kind of one of the fun tasks that is like fairly easy for human, and then LLMs, some of them really struggle with. So I have a model, I have a prompt, I get a response. Here's my response. So this is the most ad hoc testing you're gonna do. I asked X, I got Y. Okay, slightly less ad hoc testing. We're basically going to have a dictionary of parameters, and the parameters are things we're varying. And so that could be like, that's gonna be like the prompts. Here's the list of questions I wanna ask. It could be a list of base LLMs. So we're trying out a bunch of different LLMs, and we wanna see how they do. It could be some number of repetitions. Maybe we're doing each combination more than once. And then everything else you're varying. So Alan talked about this a little bit. There's different ways you can chunk your text, right? So you can sort of chunk it by sentence, you can chunk it by sort of string length. You can vary how much you overlap. So there's chunks of text can overlap by more or less, by temperature, anything else you want. You're basically gonna have a list of the possible parameters for that. And you have this big dictionary, and it's sort of like a grid search. You're kind of doing this, you're trying various combinations. So you're sticking that in, and then out you're getting your responses, and that's the main piece, that's the text. But also if you're interested in something like latency, number of tokens, cost, whatever else you want, you're gonna do that. And that's going to look something like this. So this is the most basic version of it. Here we're just varying model, and we're varying prompt, and you get a response, okay? And I think if you do something like this, if you start with a good set of requirements that reflects what you want your tool to be able to do, okay, and you get out this table, and you maybe share it with your manager or non-technical stakeholder, I think if you do that, it's not the worst. Right? It's not like maybe the best evaluation strategy, but I think it's, I would say it's a lot better than some of what is getting released. You did okay. But how do we automate that, right? How do we go from, I have this dictionary of parameters, I have this output, and the way I'm evaluating it is reading it manually, to something a little more graceful and robust. Okay, so first of all, why do we automate testing? Okay, so we automate testing like with anything else, because if I break something, I want to find out before I merge it into my code, and my project goes boom, right? And for this specifically, I would say there's kind of some other things. If I have a really big log file, and you definitely should have a log file. Like if you're releasing, right, like not everybody does, but you should have a log file of every interaction that your people are having, that your users are having, and every response you're getting back. And you might not read all of that yourself, and you're definitely not reading in real time. Okay? So with certain types of evaluations, you can do that on your whole log file, and you can get information back in a way that you're not, again, doing by yourself in real time. Maybe even as part of your pre-release testing process, you might have a lot of questions and a lot of parameters. Like let's say you want to test 30 different models, and you want to know like which the best 5 or 10 are. You probably don't want to read all those responses yourself, so you might want some way of narrowing things down in some automated way to figure out where to go from there. Yeah, and again, like, do you want to read all your, maybe you should read all your log files, but again, probably not as they come in. Okay, so how do we evaluate this? Again, we have this question, we ask this question. When I'm reading it manually, I know how to evaluate it because I know what I'm looking for, but how do I turn that into an automated evaluation? So the first, most basic kind of thing we can think about is string matching. So string matching is basically, we have this string, and we're looking for an exact sequence or pattern or something like that. So if we have a really basic question we're asking, so something like, what's the capital of France? Then we can definitely use string matching to find, is there a sequence of strings that's Paris? So we can do that. We can get a little bit more complicated, so we can use regular expressions. So like, for instance, if we ask, like, what's your favorite programming language? Looking for R, just as R as an exact match, is not really going to work, because there's going to be an R in there somewhere. But what we want to know is if there's an R and there's the appropriate set of white space or punctuation before and after. So that's going to be regex. Edit distance, and I haven't found a use case for edit distance in terms of these evals, but I feel like there might be. It's when you have one string, that's the string you're looking for, and you have the actual response, and you're looking to see how many characters you'd have to flip to get from the actual response to the thing you were looking for. And then number of keywords, which is really a variation on our exact matching. So let's say I have a list of keywords I'm looking for, and I want to know how many of them showed up in the text. So like, how is string matching? Like, it's okay. I mean, if you're looking for something pretty basic, you can use it for this. But if you're looking for something that's like a multi-step set of responses, set of instructions, you're going to have a really hard time doing that with string matching. Okay, next piece, semantic similarity. And I won't so Alan gave you a really good description of semantic similarity, because it's not just what we're using, what we can use for evaluations, it's also what our RAG chatbot is using in that first step, where it's finding related, possibly related text chunks to pass to the LLM. So that's that sort of thing where we have this text, we're using this model to sort of project it into n-dimensional space, we're projecting our response into n-dimensional space, and we're finding that distance. Does this work? This kind of works. So for instance, like a refusal response, like some version of I'm not answering that, you can definitely use semantic similarity to get at that. But again, if you have kind of a complicated answer, if you have something that's multi-step, it's going to be hard to just put in a, here's the answer I wanted to get, and use semantic similarity measures to see how far it was from what it actually got. Like, the idea here is that this is a model that takes into account context, and it takes into account kind of synonyms, and it does. But I think there are ways it's really going to struggle if you're looking for a bunch of things in your response. Okay, so next we get to the thing I'm really excited about, which are these LLM-led evaluations. And there's a couple of buckets here. There's specific content, where you know exactly what you're looking for. So like, did it say X? And there's this sort of relative content. And there's probably a better way to say that, but we'll discuss that as well. And these are the kinds of evaluations you can do, even when you didn't write a specific test case for it. And there's certain things you can still find out using your log file, even if you didn't write in what it was supposed to say for something that your user asked. Okay, so my favorite Python library is called Marvin. And Marvin is a way that I don't have to fight with the large language models to say, like, please be honest, or please tell me it exactly this way. This is basically the only code I wrote, and this lets me pass some text response or whatever kind of text to a large language model and say, basically, here are the steps I'm looking for, pass it if it didn't set all of these, fail it otherwise. And it works pretty well. And so this is something that I can write some test cases for to make sure, like, when somebody asks X, did it say Y? And this would be really hard to do with either semantic similarity or string matching, because it's really specific, okay? So I like this one. Okay, correctness as overlap. This is another way of thinking about correctness. This is something where I put in, here's basically what I want the answer to be, and I compare it to what it actually said. And the idea is that it checks to see basically what the overlap between those two things was. So was my LLM, was my RAG tool saying something that wasn't in the text that I wanted to say? Was it leaving things out? So was it incomplete? Or was it actually just saying what was in the response? And so I'm playing with this now, like it kind of works, it kind of doesn't work, it works sometimes. But I think it's promising. Okay, then we have this sort of relative content evaluation things. And one of them is like, did it answer a question, right? So like, was it non-committal? If I asked it something, did it kind of hedge? And then from here, we can go to, did it actually answer the question that I asked? And this isn't about accuracy. Again, this is something I can run on my log file. And so the LLM I'm handing this to doesn't know if the answer is correct or not, but it can at least say, if I asked, what was the capital of France, if it said 3 p.m., like that's just a bad, like it was answering a question, but it clearly wasn't answering the type of question that I asked. Okay, and this is the groundedness thing. So this is, I had these chunks of text, I passed it to the LLM. Was the answer that it gave something that was grounded in the text that I passed it, or was it making something up? And again, this isn't about accuracy, because maybe the text I passed to it was incorrect, or maybe it wasn't relevant to the question. But it's something that I can run on those log files, and that I don't need to write a specific test for. Okay, so you can share this with your manager. This is what we got. And I would say here, again, like with the difficulty level you should expect about this. This isn't like pandas. This isn't like the tidyverse. There isn't a set number. There are many walkthroughs on all of this, but there isn't a set number of steps that are going to work. So like I'm talking about groundedness. There's a bunch of different evals you can use for groundedness. There's different models you can use for it. And some of them work better than others, and there's a lot of VC money in these kinds of companies, and some of them, there's enough overlap that some of them are going to go under and not be around 5 years from now, and some of them maybe. So there's definitely like an experimental piece to this of like, we're not totally sure what works yet. There isn't something out of the box for either building RAG in a way that works or testing RAG in a way that works. And so I think that's also part of the upfront conversation about setting expectations. Okay, a quick note. So there's two pieces of your RAG chatbot. There's the part about where you're passing chunks of text to it, and there's the part about what the LLM is saying. And I'm not sort of speaking about this, maybe you can ask Alan about it, but your LLM isn't going to work the way you want it to if you're not passing it the right context chunks. And so that's some testing you can do separately. I suspect it's easier. So like that's sort of a precursor to the how is it operating is, do we even pass it the right things? Because if we didn't, it's not going to work. Okay, so here's some repos to get started with. Athena AI is doing some cool things with evals. Ragas. Aim and Relay is sort of interesting because it's a specific LLM that is for doing like groundedness work. And you can, there's part of their pitch is that is fast enough that you're supposed to be able to run it in real time. So like your user asks a question, you get something from your LLM, you pass it to this to see, like, did it answer it the way you wanted to, so you can figure out whether to actually send it to your user or not. And I don't know, like, you might like these, you might not, but I think it's sort of worth exploring what's out there if you want to do this. And then again, there's a sort of build or buy. So there are all these companies that will sell you this graphical user interface. You don't actually need to code very much. They have a library. And the trade-off there is you're not having to write the code yourself. And the downside is the company might not be around in 5 years, and there's going to be less flexibility than if you looked at all of the tools out there and kind of picked what you wanted. Okay, so I hope this has been useful for you as far as like the next step in the conversation, and when your manager asks you, hey, can you build a chatbot with our documents? So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm like very much far too on LinkedIn. I blog at President of Coding, and I have a post on alternatives to RAG. And if you're coming down from DC and you're not already very involved in data science DC, we meet regularly, and we're doing a lot of work on LLMs these days. So thank you.